welcome back to the Conclusion of the Matter podcast. I'm joined by Ryan and Ren. My name is Robbie, and we are the Conclusion of the Matter because Solomon writes in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 13 and 14, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether that be good or evil." We're so grateful that you decided to tune in and give us a listen, either for the first time or for the, I don't know how many total episodes.
Hopefully not your last, though.
Yeah, exactly. But if you have questions about the Bible or things that you've been searching for, feel free to drop a comment on this video or our other videos. Like and subscribe and share this with your friends and coworkers. But bottom line is we'd like to tackle any comments or questions that you guys have, whether that be on a podcast or you can even reach out to us via email at theconclusionofthematter@yahoo.com. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Ren. He's going to introduce today's topic.
All right. Well, today we're going to be going back to, this isn't, I guess, technically an official reoccurring segment. Maybe it is. But every now and then we like to look at some Christian evidences, type of topics, or Christian apologetics types of things. And so that's what we're going to be doing today. And we're going to be looking at evolution and maybe why we shouldn't trust it, shouldn't believe it, outside of what we would think is the obvious answer, because that's not what scriptures tell us. We understand that that's not going to be a sufficient answer for a lot of people. And, even what we're able to get into in this 35-minute podcast might not be a sufficient answer. But hopefully it will, at least, if you are a Christian, give you some more to think about, some more confidence. And if you're not a Christian, maybe give you some things to think about and consider. Because that's what we always need to do. Regardless of where on the spectrum of beliefs that we may fall, we always need to question our beliefs, question what we think, to make sure that we're believing what's true. Because, well, I guess some people wouldn't really care about that one way or another. But if we want to spend eternity with God, then that's certainly what we ought to be doing. But to get into this, just very, very briefly, I had at least to discuss what evolution claims. And evolution claims, first of all, which we've hit on some of this stuff in some other episodes. This will just be kind of a reminder and then maybe add some different things to it as well. But evolution claims that, in essence, there was nothing, and then there was this big explosion called the Big Bang. And then over billions of years, things kind of came together and eventually developed to be what we see and have today. And as far as human life is concerned, and as far as the topic of evolution is concerned, it teaches that all of life evolved from the same single-cell organism that lived 3.5 to 4.2 billion years ago. I mean, just on the surface of that, no disrespect, that seems far-fetched to me. And it seems, and we've talked about this before in previous podcasts, it also contradicts a number of known scientific laws. And also you're left with the question, well, how did that single-celled organism come into existence? And then to bring this to humans, they say it took us about 6 million or so years to evolve once we kind of departed from what they claim are our ape-like ancestors, to go through like the stages of Neanderthals and then cavemen and then, like what you see in the Geico commercials, to what we are now. It took about 6 million years for that to happen. Now, what we're not discussing here is what I think we would all agree, and most scientists, regardless of where they fall on this, agree that microevolution does take place, which are small adaptations within a species. But what we're talking about is macroevolution, which is a transition from one species to a totally different species. That's the point of contention and debate. And there's a lot of reasons why it is hard for me to believe that, but so that I don't steamroll this whole episode, what do you guys want to say before we get into some stuff, if anything?
I think something you mentioned earlier, the Big Bang, going from chaos to organization it doesn't work in any other situation. I mean, I throw a bucket of bolts up, I don't get something except for a pile of bucket of bolts on the ground. I can take a deck of cards, throw them up, I don't get anything but a 52 card pickup. And they may say, well, that's because that's not scientific and all this kind of, but you just don't, even in today's world, we do not see, and this really, some people will try to tie evolution with a creator, but you don't see a creation, whether it's a device, whether it's a painting, whether it's architecture, whatever. There's always someone that came up with the concept, threw it out there, and built it. I'm not saying, some people say, well, yeah, God created the earth, but he used evolution to do it. Then get into theistic evolution, which we've got episodes on, so go listen to those. But I think it's more, in my opinion, is more of a leap of blind faith for that than for me to believe that there's an all-powerful creator that spoke it into his existence.
Well, I've heard it said before, atheists kind of mock Christians because of their belief in miracles and then in the resurrection and things like that. But their whole system depends on a miracle. And that miracle is something coming from nothing. They're like, if you just give us that one miracle, which is a huge miracle, then we can explain everything else after that. But it's like, well, no, you can't do that operating within your paradigm. That it totally, I guess, not necessarily negates, but it just undermines your whole system.
It reminds me of that joke where the scientists said they went and met with God and said, we have discovered how to create life. And God's like, okay, how'd you do it? And he's like, well, we took this dirt and he's like, no.
Get your own dirt.
Get your own dirt. Anyway.
Right. There's a guy that I've seen several different clips on the internet about. I don't know if he's like currently doing anything or these videos were recorded in like the 80s or 90s or some other decade. But his name is Kent Hovind, and he has a lot of good videos on this kind of stuff as well. But one of his videos I was watching is when you talk about evolution, you have to kind of like define what type of evolution you're talking about. And I actually hadn't thought about it this way, but he said, there's really at least 6 types of evolution. There's cosmic evolution, and that's the one that's talking about the Big Bang. How did time, space, and matter evolve or, to come about? Besides cosmic evolution, you also had chemical evolution that had to take place, the origin of elements and how they evolved into, all the elements that there are today from hydrogen, presumably. And then you have stellar evolution. So you have to have, just related to stars and other parts of the galaxy and stuff. And that was one that he kind of stopped in his video, and he said it's never been observed that a star's been created, only that they've, exploded and fallen and stuff. But it's never been observed. And most of these also haven't been observed. We'll get to that here in a minute. Another common one, organic evolution, just where did life begin? And I figure we'll be spending more time on that, so I won't go down a rabbit hole yet. And you brought in microevolution and macroevolution. Macroevolution, changing from one species or one kind to another. Microevolution, keeping the same species but having different variations, whether that be
our skin tones in humans,
yes,
and different
or
things like that.
Beak colors or
Sizes,
distances, shapes, etc. So microevolution is the only one that has been observed, and the other 5 have not been observed. And also for a lot of these,
if you don't believe them, then you're an idiot.
Right. Well, and another book I was reading, I haven't read this book in a few years, But when I was teaching a class in Tennessee, this was probably about 5 to 7 years ago. We used some of the answers in Genesis books to kind of gather some information, and within those books, and I forget the author. I think it's Ken Ham that wrote a lot of those books. But it goes into like a lot of the scientific laws, and it also makes a point that there's a difference between like observable data versus historical data. Historical data, you're relying on something that happened in the past that you've not witnessed, that you're just,
that was recorded accurately.
Yeah,
as
and
well.
That's a caveat that he makes, that sometimes there's actual like evidence in place, and sometimes you're just going like on speculation, and that's really what evolution over time, no matter which part you're talking about, but particularly we'll take cosmic evolution and the Big Bang. It's still a theory because it can't be proven, but it's kind of taught as if that it's historical data that it took place. Even when I was doing research, how in Google you can it'll like give that little blurb that an AI will spit out. And here, let me see if I can get it to come up here. So I think this is like technically Google Gemini or some kind of AI. But it says, and I quote, "The theory of evolution does not violate any known laws of science, including the laws of thermodynamics." So we're gonna break that down. I have a feeling here in the next few minutes, but it's just been so widely accepted. And another important reminder about science is that consensus does not necessarily dictate if it's a fact or not. Yes. And I think that's an important consideration, that just because a lot of people agree on it doesn't mean that it's a fact. I mean, you can go back to the, democracy is two wolves in a sheep voting on what's for dinner kind of thing. Same thing, that the scientific community can be wrong.
And how often are they wrong?
Yeah.
Like how it seems like it's almost a daily occurrence where it's like, oh, hey, 20 years ago we thought that this was accurate, but turns out we were not even in the same realm of what we now think is true.
Well, even the Big Bang, they used to just say that, it was like the cosmic egg, size of a period that just randomly exploded. And now they're like, okay, well, wait a minute. Maybe the cosmic egg was created by another galaxy, and then it was put there, and then it exploded, or, there's all kinds of variances. Even I think of, just, this is probably a dumb example, but like global warming, and then when they started researching it, all of the global temperatures had been decreasing instead of increasing. So they're like, oh, wait, it's climate change, actually.
The thing that kills me is when people like Neil deGrasse Tyson are like, it's possible that we're living in a simulation, that some other, higher life forms have created us and we're just living. It's like, what are you talking? You can believe that, but you can't believe in God? I mean, how ridiculous is that? That drives me nuts. It's like, just come on, people.
Even the other galaxy one, not only do you have to overcome with all of this that you're overlooking that everything has to come from something, the law of cause and effect, which we'll get to, but the fact that
how did they get to this galaxy? How do they say they got put in this galaxy?
Well, the whole premise, I haven't, done in-depth research on this, but the premise is that there are multiple galaxies that we don't know about yet because they're so far away, and that there's probably even more than we even fathom. And so because of that, it's likely that another galaxy that humans or whoever, that life existed in these other galaxies, and then created the cosmic egg. And I'm sure there's different variations of it, too.
So stupid. Where did those people come
Ren's
from,
getting
then?
stressed out
I
over
am.
here.
This is driving me nuts. Where did those people come from, then? Because you're left with the same question.
Another galaxy that had humans.
You're left with the same question.
Where did it come from?
Where did it come from? And it's like they will try everything other than just admit. And it's like sometimes they're met with a brick wall of like, okay, well, life cannot come from non-life. So let's change the parameters of this to try to fix it so that God's still not a part of it. Mm-hmm. It's just, it drives me nuts.
A lot of times they add more time.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh,
That's their
well,
go-to.
now
Yeah.
it's, yeah. So,
Yeah.
That's another good point. That's a discussion for another day.
Yeah.
Because I've been told I have a time limit for
Yes.
this one. But I mean, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I think like we've been exposed to too much Doctor Strange and Marvel, maybe, and that like the multiverse and everything,
Yeah.
to me, is a little bit of a stretch. But
It's all Disney's fault.
yeah, so I mean, I guess. Well, I'll let you drive again since you're technically the host. But I think it's an important point to remember that I hadn't really even thought of too much, that there's different types of evolution,
Yeah.
really, and
Yeah,
each
that's a good point.
individually have never been observed, with the
Yeah.
exception of
Yeah.
microevolution.
Yeah. Well, the main thing I was wanting to bring up in this episode as to why I doubt evolution, and y'all feel free to add in whatever you want to add too. But for me, one of the most compelling arguments for the existence of God and for the denial of evolution is basically Paul's argument in Revelation 1, but Romans 1 and verse 20.
Mm-hmm.
How the creation is evidence of a creator. Going back, you even kind of brought that up a moment ago. When you look at how just incredibly complex this universe is, even, Jim mentioned it in his prayer this morning, even down to the smallest particles and molecules. It's
intricacy
just so
of life. Yeah.
incredibly complex. Because there was a time, like during Charles Darwin's day in the 1800s or whatever, the idea of life coming from a single cell didn't seem that far-fetched to them because they thought a single cell was super simple.
Mm-hmm.
But the more we've studied cells, the more we realize they are
Complex,
incredibly complex. Like, I encourage you, go try to find a video that talks about the functions of a cell. It's mind-blowing what goes on inside a single cell.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that complexity, I cannot bring myself to believe that somehow that all happened just randomly over billions of years. That doesn't make any sense. One of the things that
Back to your bucket of bolts over there, Ryan.
One of the things that I've studied some recently, there's a few resources I want to give y'all. One of them, I have a book in my library called Convicted by Brad Harrop. That's good. It's a pretty good, I would say, surface level book if you want to look at some of these things. But there's another, it's an audio book that I've been listening to. I haven't listened to it in quite some time, but it's called Darwin's Doubt by Stephen Meyer. Stephen Meyer does a lot of stuff, and he's a part of an organization called the Discovery Institute, which is basically, it's an institution that is, well, how do I say this? It's scientists that are a part of this institution who believe in intelligent design and are doing research and things from that viewpoint. So he does a lot. Again, his name is Stephen Meyer. There's another book called Darwin's Black Box by a man named Michael Behe. Again, you can look him up. John Lennox is at least he was a math professor, I think at like Cambridge or something like that. But he has a lot of discussions and debates with people. And then there's another book that I've read, listened to. It's called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Norman Geisler, Frank Turek, and David Limbaugh. All of those things, and you can find all sorts of stuff. Apologetic Express has got a lot of good stuff as well. But they go into a lot of these things we're talking about, like the intricacies of a cell. And one of the things that I went down that rabbit hole for a reason, because in looking and listening to what a lot of these guys had to say, one of the things that they had brought up was DNA. And so I started looking at DNA and how incredibly complex it is, because in DNA, you've always seen it represented as that helix structure. And with each of the lines that's within the helix, there's two, what they're called, base chemicals. And there's 4 chemicals. I probably am not going to pronounce these correctly: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. So those 4. And they're generally represented as A, T, C, and G. Well, in DNA, there are 300 billion, they're called base pairs, which is, if you think about that line that's in the helix, it's two of those chemicals that have come together that make that line, so to speak. Now, the chemical A always pairs with the chemical T, and the chemical C always pairs with the chemical G. And so when you look at a sequence within DNA, you might have like AT and then CG and then TA and then another TA and then maybe an AT and then a GC and then just on, however, 300 billion times that goes on in a single strand of DNA.
Just one strand.
Yeah. And from what I have read, they've estimated that if you were to like type that out in a Word document or something, those 300 billion letter combinations would be like 2 million pages long. That's just a single strand
tiny
of DNA.
Font in your DNA.
Yeah. And all of that is like, it's basically a computer program. It controls our genes, controls cell functions, controls all sorts of stuff and it's in every single cell. It just, how can we bring ourselves to believe that just happened? And people will say, well, yeah, but don't you know that we share, I looked it up, 98.8% of our DNA with chimpanzees? And it's like, okay, so that's a 1.2% difference. And I did the math on this and double-check my math because I'm not a mathematician. But according to my math, that would...
Just going to get my calculator up right now.
You got one on your laptop, I'm sure. That would be 3.6 million differences between our DNA and the DNA of a chimpanzee, which is why we're not chimpanzees.
I thought we actually shared more DNA with a pig. I
We might.
I thought I'd heard that.
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it's like 97 or like 93% with a banana as well.
Oh,
I think it's 50 or 60 with the banana because people bring that up too.
So,
but I mean, even with just a 1% difference, you're still looking at millions of differences in that sequence of the A and T and
that's
C
why
and G.
Percentages are tricky because you got to look at your denominator.
You're thinking 98. Okay, well then we're basically chimpanzees.
Basically
but then when you actually look at the numbers, it's like, okay, no, this is way different. Which again is why we're not chimpanzees.
But also, it doesn't surprise me that we have a lot in common because the Creator created all of us. Yes. So I don't know. Anyway, I mean, if you think about it, there are similarities.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we, you know what I mean? There are.
But I think that, kind of to your point, that goes back to the fact that we have a creator.
A common creator,
and that, you know, you can look to those intricate details, you know, even, you know, like hands on monkeys versus human hands, things like that, that really kind of show that.
Yeah.
And, you know, something that Ryan said and that we've also kind of been talking about is without factoring even like the laws of science directly, for all of this, for just the Big Bang alone, I mean, you've got to have order from chaos. You're getting life from non-life. And that's a big thing with like evolution that, you know, we all evolved from, you know, a single cell of bacteria or whatever it was. That's never been observed. So the fact that it's never been observed, but yet we're going to make exception for this, and we're going to make an exception for order from chaos, life from non-life, all of these different things. No, you know, the law of cause and effect, the fact that the world is deteriorating and losing information instead of gaining it. We could look to so many different things. And then we can get into the laws of science, which I didn't know if you were wanting to take that angle, but
I mean, we can do it.
Yeah,
for a few minutes.
I think we got time. I'll try to limit myself, but
all right, let's set a timer for 3 minutes.
All right, so
go, Robbie.
But and some of these I kind of just referenced, but for any of these evolutions to be true, but particularly cosmic evolution, chemical evolution, and organic evolution. It's going to automatically violate the law of cause and effect, which is also the first law of thermodynamics, that every physical effect has to have a cause. And we've danced all around this one, just the idea that we have something coming from nothing. That has to be violated, and that's the most fundamental law of science that there is, and that's never been observed to not be the case. Same thing with the second law of thermodynamics.
I wonder why Gemini. I wonder what. I know Gemini is using sources to generate its
why it would say it.
I wonder what it's mining that. I've never. Interesting.
I can.
It probably doesn't tell you, but just go on with your stuff. I was thinking out loud. Sorry. You turn the timer back on.
Okay. All right. We're not taking that out.
Out of his time. Sorry.
But second law of thermodynamics is just that everything physical is deteriorating. Obviously, the universe being one of those things, we are slowly deteriorating. Which we won't go on to the tangent of the age of the Earth, but that also kind of has issues with that as well.
That posed a lot of problems, as I understand it, for Albert Einstein, because up until his time, the consensus was that the universe was eternal. Until I don't know what it is that he did, where they were finally confronted with the fact, well, no, it had a beginning. Because if it were eternal, then you might be able to kind of weasel around some of these things.
Yep. But
weasel.
I mean, that's what it is.
But also, like, being eternal kind of violates, cause and effect in science as well. But you have those two, particularly with organic evolution, you've got to get around that you have life coming from non-life, and that has never been observed. We've never observed something that is non-living evolve or change into something, or even have any kind of adaptation that would resemble something that's living. So that's never been observed. So I mean, we could go down a laundry list of different problems, but just they violate the most fundamental, not like complicated laws, but the most fundamental ones that's been established. And they would cease to be laws of science if they were ever violated. Then they would become just theories, which is what we're talking about here.
The other thing I was going to bring up, Ryan, did you have anything? Okay. The other thing I was going to bring up is something else that I learned about, I think, from Stephen Meyer in his discussions, but also he goes into a lot of detail about this in his book, Darwin's Doubt. But it's something called...
Darwin also didn't believe his theory as it's been presented when his life was over also. So,
Darwin.
So there's also that point. Sorry to interrupt.
But it was the Cambrian explosion, which is... It was something actually talking about Darwin. When he posed his theory, this was an issue that he was even aware of during his lifetime. It posed a threat to his theory of evolution. Because what it is in the strata of the Earth, you go back through the fossil record in the Cambrian era, or however the proper terminology is, you see this explosion of major animal forms. So like you see fish, you see birds and mammals and things like that almost just appearing in the fossil record there. And there's no connection between them and kind of like intermediate stages in the lower levels of the strata, which is what you would expect to find if evolution were true. If we gradually over millions of years...
The missing link.
Missing links type of things. And so what they saw was, hey, there's no in-betweens kind of a thing with all of these different species. And Darwin at first was like, well, we just haven't had enough time to find them. But as I understand it, the more time we've had to go and to look, we've seen more and more species just kind of popping up in the fossil record. Not that they literally just popped up. But we still have not found those intermediate or the transitional life forms that led to those, which is another thing that causes me to doubt it, because it's like, okay, well...
Wouldn't have found one?
Yeah, we can't find anything. And not only that, but there have been times where they fabricated some of them. There was one... I can't remember if his name was Piltdown Man or if it was like Kadaba or something. But both of those, I believe, were fabricated. But one of them was the skull of a human and I think the jawbone of an orangutan. And they filed down the teeth so that it would fit the teeth of the human. And then they put the whole thing in acid to age it all and then presented that as the missing link. Another one was like they found this skeleton of, I think, some sort of like ape-like creature. And then not even at that same excavation site, but somewhere down the road, they found a toe bone. And then they put the toe bone with the skeleton and said that somehow because of the hips and the toe and all of this, that was the missing.
So I find it interesting that the transitional species would have one bone difference.
Yeah.
But anyway.
It's not incredibly obvious.
Yeah.
Like all of the drawings that we've seen where it's like, oh, this is so obviously this transitional. Like, oh, well, why don't we have millions? And that's the other thing about evolution is you would have to have at least a male and a female both evolving at the exact same rate in order to progress and in the same area where they would be able to reproduce. But it's just, I mean, there's just so many things.
Tell me how you really feel, Ren.
Yeah, I think it's stupid. There's just so many things, and there's so many hoops that would have to be jumped through in order to make this work. It's just unreasonable to me.
Yeah, many things would have to kind of co-evolve together. I mean, think of how many examples of symbiosis. I think we've talked about this probably before, so I won't harp on it too much. But, you know, even just generically plants and animals, you know, that one relies on carbon dioxide, one relies on oxygen. So if something drastically evolved with one, it would have to happen to the other one too.
Yeah.
I mean, you could look at individual organisms that benefit mutually as well, but they would have to co-evolve together as well. And not that I'm saying that it's possible, I'm just saying that would have to be the case.
Well, and that it reminded me, I saw a video the other day that talks about these trees. I don't know if I would think this is true of all trees, I'm not sure, but trees up in New England, like Vermont and Maine, in that area, because, you know, that area is like really known for being super pretty during fall because of the colors of the leaves. And it's been studied that, you know, what makes the leaves green is chlorophyll. And it's been studied that the changing of the leaves, we always think of it as the leaves are just dying because winter, it's getting colder. But really what it is the tree knows that winter is coming, and so it's drawing the chlorophyll out of the leaves and back into itself so that when spring comes, it can push the chlorophyll back out and regrow its leaves. Like, are you kidding me? That just happened. That's so absurd to me.
Even
I find it interesting the tree knows.
Well, you know,
I know
that's
what you mean.
Yes.
Well,
I mean, but it kind of does.
It does. God made it do that.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't believe that, but
kind of, you know,
I'm
not
with you.
animal instincts, but kind of, you know,
it works
the
that
same
way
idea.
because that's the design of it.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I think it was Brad Harrod that also. I was watching a video. This video I may have watched like 10 years ago though, but the geologic column, it had on there, you know, the different levels and stuff. You were kind of explaining some of this, and it had a tree going across multiple ones. Where the tree would have been like, you know, like 3 million years old or something. And you know, I don't know about the trees back.
there was a whale too that they found in that vertical polystrate where it's like, if it really took that long to cover, it would have. I mean, literally would have rotted. The tree would have rotted, and the carcass would have disintegrated before, which tells you that it was a deluge over the top of it. But anyway,
I mean, we could really spend a whole podcast. I mean, you could take a lot of these different tangents. The geologic column, we could do our own. Actually, here's an idea I was thinking of. Maybe we could throw it in the rotation for this season or next. Is one on carbon dating, because I think that's one. That, you know, the scientific community just accepts, like, you know, this is how old it is because, you know, we've carbon dated it. And so that might be one that's useful because, you know, especially when I was in high school, you know, I didn't necessarily struggle with the age of the earth or anything like that per se, but just, you know, that's another thing that's kind of presented as fact, and you don't really know how they date it. It's just, you know, very mathematical, and that it is the case. Now, I've done more research on it since then, but don't want to spoil if we decide to do a podcast on it. So,
well, and that's another kind of qualm that I have is it's like scientists will come out and they'll say something, and it's almost like, well, just because they're scientists, then it has to be true.
accurate.
And
it's kind of been the case with all
well,
of
and that's
this,
kind of what
really.
you've talked about before. Just because it's the consensus doesn't mean that it's true.
And again, I found it really useful. I don't mean to beat the dead horse on this one, but breaking up into those different ones, cosmic evolution,
You're not going to
Big
make
Bang,
yourself.
not.
No, I'm not, because you'll put a horse head on me again. I was just trying to say you beat a dead horse, but you can evolve into something else. But anyway,
Yeah.
into a zebra.
I guess it could. But breaking those up and seeing that even individually, the argument doesn't really hold water, I think is an important thing because, I think evolution can be presented really simply that it's just change over time, and everybody's like, oh, yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah.
But then when you actually kind of get down into it, there's, it's like,
There's a lot
actually,
of
none of this
issues.
makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, well, y'all got anything else? There's really a lot more that
plenty,
could be
but,
said about this topic, but I guess we'll have to cut ourselves off here. But it was, well, I was going to say it's good to be with y'all, but y'all aren't here. Y'all are here. It's good to be with y'all, I guess.
thank you.
But we're glad that y'all have tuned in
It's
to
good to be
listen
here.
to this. I hope it's been beneficial and not, I don't know. But we're getting a little delirious because we've done a few of these today, but it's
I think me and Ryan have done quite well for ourselves. You're the one over there
that's
struggling.
probably true.
Delirious. Anyway.
But we're glad that y'all have tuned in. Hopefully this has helped you, given you some more to think about, maybe sparked some more interest to go and to study these things in more depth. I certainly encourage you to do so. It will strengthen your faith. And I guess for evolution, for now, we can say this is the
Conclusion of the matter.